Join us for a journey as we go back to the great civilizations of the past. Who were the people? What were they like? How did they begin? And how did they end? Let's find out on episode 88, the 680s BC.
The 80s. I love the 80s. Who doesn't? MTV, big hair, Madonna, Duran Duran, Margaret Thatcher, Ronald, tear down this wall, Reagan, Gorbachev, Ferris Bueller, E.T., and my favorite, The Princess Bride. My name is Inigo Montoya. You kill... And how about Rubik's Cube? Jean jackets, penny loafers. And there was my 9th grade dance when my date ignored me the whole time. Because I was wearing orange shoes and general teenage angst, but otherwise...
Oh my God, it's the 680s, not the 1980s.
That's cool. I love the 680s too. It's got all kinds of Iron Age adventures. Sennacherib is in a bad mood and kicks butt. The Greeks are colonizing all over the place and having naked Olympics. Nations and rulers rise and fall. But first, Bernie, we have to talk about you. Who are you and what are you doing here?
Well, I'm here to be the first time my co-host with you, the fan of history. I'm definitely a fan of the fan of history. I actually do have a history degree from Penn State.
Wow.
But I haven't actually never used it except for being a fan of history and things like that. I started my own business after college, and then I work in a business now. So this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited to be able to do this. I hope Dan lets me do. I hope you let me do more of these.
Maybe.
That'll be good. I mean, the research was a lot easier than back in college when I had to go into the stacks and read into the little, microfiche and stuff like that. And I totally enjoyed researching this for this podcast. It's sort of like the link between the classical age and the Bronze Age and this Iron Age stuff. And there's a lot of things that go on in the 680s. You'd be surprised. Almost like the 1980s.
I'm quite surprised, actually, at how much information you can find about these old decades. When I started the podcast, I thought it would be like 30 episodes and then we'd be at 500. But no, or maybe 50 episodes, one per decade. But we've broken that. This will probably be more than one episode.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I found a lot of stuff. You're doing the whole world too, so it's not just one area. Although, there's a lot more information on some of the civilizations that were more. They were still writing. They didn't lose everything. So we have a lot of information on the Near East, like Sennacherib.
Yes.
And the sack of Babylon.
Ooh. I have to tell the listeners how much I put you through, and I'm so thankful because you have done all the research for this, and I'm going to force you to do all the editing as well. So thank you very much in advance.
Well, as they say, you have to push yourself out of your comfort zone, so that will also be pushing me out of my comfort zone. But hey, that's what life is about, right?
Absolutely. You have to tell me a little more about your history degree. How much work was that? How long did you study history at Penn State?
Well, it took me 5 years to get through school because I also studied beer drinking at Penn State. So, 5 years. The regular history classes are pretty much like your standard history classes, the earlier classes, but then the more advanced ones, they teach you how to learn history. There's different types of sources. You have your secondary sources, which are other historians, and then maybe even, today you could say things you'd find on the internet, and then the primary sources, which is where you go down and you read, what Sennacherib wrote and what was written there. And I mean, the true scholars, they get right into the translations of a Greek or the cuneiform and that kind of thing. So, you could study like the smallest little episode and just really dig into it. And I think when you learn history that way, it makes you, remember when the History Channel first came out and it was kind of interesting and there was good history, and now they're doing like aliens and just stuff like that. And just for a layperson who doesn't know how to study history, and they'll, watch one of those shows and they'll say, oh, see,
yeah,
the aliens built the pyramids. But there's scholars that study the smallest detail for years, and And then you can't just discard what they're studying and say, oh yeah, an alien built the pyramids.
Yeah, there have been so many interesting historical facts that I have learned from some questionable source, and then I've been so disappointed when I found out that they were not really true.
Right.
Such as the Chinese circumvention of the world in the 15th century.
That's right. That was a book that turned out to be pseudo-history, I believe, right?
Yes. And also this worldwide civilization in 10,000 BC and stuff. That was, this is so fascinating. Oh, okay, it was a load of crap.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're definitely not going to give any loads of crap in this podcast. That's right?
Yeah, we're going to stay to what we're going to stick with what the historians tell us.
Right, and I'm sure that some, when they wrote the history, so some of it's going to be, especially this era, we have some fantastic stories, I could tell you. That have.
Yes, I've also been surprised at how much new information is coming out, even since I started the YouTube channel back in 2014. Some things have been outdated already.
It is amazing.
Because that work is ongoing on ancient history.
Mm-hmm. And genetic study is great too. Although they could study the genes of from past, and they could find out what people lived where, and it's definitely history is having sort of a renaissance with a lot of new information coming out.
Absolutely. Do you listen to any history podcasts?
I do. I listened to Dan Carlin when he was able to come out with one, and History on Fire.
Oh.
History on Fire, Danelli Bolelli, his name is.
Was that the guy who was in Hardcore History Addendum recently?
Yes, that's him. He's an Italian guy.
Yeah, he was very good.
He is good. His podcasts are great. I make, on the side, from my regular business, I make T-shirts in my office.
Oh.
And I listen to podcasts. So I listen to your podcast, listen to Dan Carlin. I make them with an iron, so it's time-consuming. And listening to the history podcasts, totally.
So we can't start selling Fan of History T-shirts yet?
Whenever you're ready.
Okay.
I've been in the T-shirt business for like 20-some years, so yep.
Okay, listeners, tell us if you want Fan of History T-shirts, and we'll make something up.
And then if you sign up for the Patreon page, we'll send them to you, T-shirts.
Oh, don't promise anything we can't do, but that is an option.
Gotcha.
Any other podcasts?
That I listen to? Mostly just those history podcasts. Your podcast, History on Fire, Dan Carlin. Sometimes Freakonomics. I like Freakonomics. I don't know if you've ever listened to those guys.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, that's sort of like a history, too, because a lot of motivations through things that are really economical, through economics. It's people do things for their own reasons. I mean, you study economics, you realize why things happen. Those are the main ones.
And you listen to all of Fan of History, right?
Most of them, I have to say. Most of them. There's quite a few. I did go through most of them. And the YouTube channel as well.
Hopefully we will have better audio than the earlier episodes. We have taken precautions for the audio. I hope it works.
I hope so as well.
Anything else you want to tell the listeners about yourself before we start?
Oh, about me, yeah, one thing you might find interesting. I live in Scranton, Pennsylvania, which is the setting for The Office, if you know the TV show The Office. And that's the fictional. Well, I mean, it's a real city. They don't actually. They never filmed it here, but in the show they always mention Scranton. So if there's any fans of The Office, they'll definitely be familiar with Scranton.
So it's set in Scranton, but it's not really filmed in Scranton.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, thanks for the introduction.
You're welcome.
Let's get into the 680s BC.
Okay. Should we start with Sennacherib?
And we will just record everything.
Gotcha.
And then we'll cut it up into episodes. So
okay. I agree.
I think that will be the best. Then we will be in the flow. And we start out with a major event.
Yes, definitely. The sack of Babylon. I mean, in the last podcast, we know that Sennacherib was dealing with the Babylonians and, oh my goodness, I lost my train of thought for a second.
The Elamites.
The Elamites, but what was his name? His arch rival. It just slipped my mind.
Oh, it slipped my mind too. My God.
Right?
This is so bad.
Right? That's what happens with age. Hold on, we'll find his name. Oh my gosh. Marduk Baladon, right?
Yes.
Right. He was like his nemesis for his whole life. I mean, the man dogged him his whole life and then died in his bed. He never caught him.
Yeah, that's an amazing villain story.
Right? It is. I mean, you could make a whole movie about that. So, but he finally did die, and then his ally, the Elamite King, Humban-Nimena, he died.
I love forcing people to say the names of Elamite kings.
Oh, yeah, it's wonderful. I always wonder, too, like, just think of these scribes had to carve that in cuneiform on these tablets with these names.
Yeah, but why can't they be like Kurt or something?
I know. I know.
The Elamite King Bob.
Yeah.
What happened to him?
Maybe if we translate it that way. Maybe that's what Humban-Nimena actually translates to, Bob.
Probably
Possible.
not. It's probably like the glorious son of the universe or something.
Oh, for sure. The glorious son of the universe, king of Ashur. So at this point, when he died, Sennacherib figured, you know what, this is enough. Let's just take care of this Babylonian problem once and for all. And I'm sure there was, like in our countries today, there was probably factions, where one side said, just turn that city into glass. That's enough. We're being like wimps. We have to finish this once and for all. And other people probably said, oh, that's not a good idea. And eventually the ones who had the idea of let's just finish them once and for all.
Yeah, I think the Assyrians have been trying to solve this problem for 200 years. We have seen so many different options of dealing with Babylon. Shalmaneser III was their friend, or he was friend with one faction and make sure that faction ruled Babylon. And that worked for a time. Some people tried to become king of Babylon, like Tiglath-Pileser II. But the solution isn't there. Maybe this is the solution. Maybe you just have to take off and nuke the site from orbit.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if they tried everything else, they might as well, I guess he figured he would try this. So,
yes.
So in the last episode, I know you talked about the battle of...
Yeah, the 691 battle, the battle of Halula.
Halula.
Where we have these conflicting sources where the Babylonians say the Assyrians retreated, and Sennacherib, of course, says that he won. But that's what all Assyrian kings say of everything.
Mm-hmm. My opinion is maybe the Assyrians did retreat, but it was a Pyrrhic victory because it seems after that the Babylonians didn't have much left in the gun to fight back. So when he came back, there was really nothing left, and it just seems that he just swept right in and started the siege. It's pretty difficult to...
Yeah, and we have this guy, Marduk, who is the ruler of Babylon.
Yep.
Now allyless.
And then it seems by 690 the siege just began, and from what I read, it seems like it lasted about 15 months, which must have been a lot of fun for, them in the city, having the Assyrians building up their siege engines, and it's pretty cool how they would build a wall, they'd build a ramp up to the wall and then come over the wall and just kill everybody, basically.
Yeah, in 2016, I was in Berlin in the museum there where they have the actual gate of Babylon. They have the gate. They took it during the 19th century.
That's amazing.
And they restored it. It's I think it's 22 meters wide. And so this is a well-fortified city. Yeah, I think it's interesting also that he goes immediately for the city itself. And I think he also has allies in Babylon. There are still people who are pro-Assyrian in the country.
Yeah. Do you think he let them out? Do you think he let them out of Babylon? Like, come out, everybody out before we come in? And I mean, how do you tell who's a good guy, I guess, or your ally and not when you go in there and once the rampage gets started?
Yeah, I think the ones who are allies are no longer in the city itself.
Right.
But rather ruling other cities nearby.
Oh, yes, gotcha, right. Well, yeah, they definitely didn't have any, and they didn't have, like in the siege of Jerusalem, there was no field mice to eat up all the leather, no angel of death to save them.
No.
He just went in and let have it.
And it is a complete Assyrian victory.
Mm-hmm. There's the most information we have is from an inscription from Sennacherib. You want to read that? You want me to read that?
My best Assyrian.
I think you'll do good.
Assyrian voice here. So this is the primary source then, Sennacherib telling, and we have reason to doubt this, but we'll talk about it later.
Okay.
So now, without further ado, Sennacherib. I swiftly marched to Babylon, which I was intent upon conquering. I blew like the onrush of a hurricane and enveloped the city like a fog. I completely surrounded it and captured it by breaching and scaling the walls. I did not spare his mighty warriors, young or old, but filled the city square with their corpses. I turned over to my men to keep the property of that city, silver, gold, gems, all the movable goods. My men took hold of the statues of the gods in the city and smashed them. They took possession of the property of the gods. The statues of Adad and Shala, gods of the city Ekalati, that Marduk Nahin Ahe, king of Babylonia, had taken to Babylon at the time of Tiglath-Pileser, the first king of Assyria, I brought out of Babylon after 418 years. I returned them to the city of Ekalati. The city and houses I completely destroyed from foundations to roof and set fire to them. I tore down both inner and outer city walls, temples, temple towers made of brick and clay, as many as there were, and threw everything into the Aratu Canal. I dug a ditch inside the city and thereby leveled off the earth on its site with water. I destroyed even the outline of its foundations. I flattened it more than any flood could have done, in order that the site of that city and its temples would never be remembered. I devastated it with water so that it became a mere meadow.
Pretty intense.
I also heard that one goal with this operation was that there would be no place for a bird to land in the ruins of Babylon. There would be nothing above ground.
I mean, that's a pretty intense. I mean, if you did that today, you would definitely be convicted of war crimes. There's no doubt about it.
Definitely.
And
I love the Assyrian propaganda thing. It sounds like he did all of this himself, and his men were just standing there sort of being given silver, gold, and gems.
Right. And then, of course, his son rebuilds it 10 years later. Like, what did he even know where the foundations were? Oh, sorry. Cut that out.
Yeah, that's the main reason to disbelieve this story, but it is quite the story.
It is, for sure. That was the Assyrians' way was, it's sort of maybe you can make a moral judgment, like if they make you really afraid, they only have to destroy one city instead of going out and destroying 30 cities. In other words, when they pull up in front of your city because they destroyed that one, just surrender.
But this is so extreme for an Assyrian king. We haven't seen anything like this. There's been no rage like this directed to a single city, because when the Assyrians took cities, they usually just incorporated them into the empire. They transported the inhabitants of the city to some other place where they would have to defend the borders of Assyria. And then they took the city. And this treatment of the gods is nothing like this has happened before. They usually steal the gods.
Right.
And they respect the Babylonian gods. And this is probably what makes Assyrians so angry about this act.
I mean, totally. It was like a temper tantrum. It could just like as if he destroyed the city and then stomped on it after it was already gone.
It's enormous. Its magnitude is so large. It's hard to understand where all this rage comes from.
Well, I think it's he was just so frustrated with constantly having to fight them and could not, just seemed that they would not go away. I mean, it's also been said it's like a blood feud. They stole his oldest son. They took him away. Whoever knows what happened to him. I mean, they never found him, you know. So I think his manhood sort of was at stake there. He had to really finally show them, and he couldn't build his city anymore. He couldn't in Nineveh because he constantly had to deal with Babylon. So I guess he figured, once and for all, let's just get rid of them.
Yeah, I think we must remember here what Sennacherib really wants to do. He wants to build stuff. Mm-hmm. And also here he gets to destroy a lot of stuff that other people have built so that he can have the most glorious buildings.
For sure.
But I think he's also like missing his father. He was quite content when Sargon was conquering Babylon, and the treatment Sargon gave to Babylon, because then Sennacherib could stay at home and build stuff. But now Sargon is gone and he has to handle it, and I think that frustrates him a lot.
I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, even all the other campaigns he did was really, a lot of it was related to Babylon. I mean, when the angel of death destroyed his whole army outside of Jerusalem, that was because he was punishing Jerusalem for siding with Babylon way back then.
Yeah, so maybe this is his choice for the final solution for Babylon, and it won't work, but it's at least it's something new they are trying.
Yeah, you know, that's one thing about Sennacherib. He kept trying anyway. He's kind of like the Wile E. Coyote. You know, he's kind of always frustrated. Seems like a smart guy, but frustrated all the time.
He's a romantic builder, and people won't let him do his thing.
Nope.
All these responsibilities, somebody has to pay.
Yep, I know. I'm going to just go out and destroy that city. I'll tell you. It's the thing is that it was a holy city, so it's almost like if you think about, you know, like Rome today or Mecca or Jerusalem even, you know, today, like if somebody just went out and destroyed Mecca or destroyed Rome, even if they were your enemy, it wouldn't go over very well with the population. So it didn't go over very well with the Assyrians.
Yeah, this is such a... Well, he will receive a lot of criticism for this act, and it will lead to his undoing. But the people of these times believed the god actually resided in the statue in the temple of their home city. That is the home of the god. And destroying the statues and the temples, it's a huge sacrilege. It is.
I mean, it's like the gods are actually fighting.
And Sennacherib is taking on the gods.
Mm-hmm. I guess maybe he kind of won, but in the end, what happened to Sennacherib?
We'll find out.
All right.
When we get there. We have to mention that the statue of Marduk himself, the main god of the Babylonian pantheon, was taken back to Nineveh and wasn't destroyed.
Right. That's pretty amazing. I know I've talked to you about this before, but the Anne Rice book, it's called The Servant of the Bones, where actually the story is that they put a person, his spirit, into the statue of Marduk so that he could do the parade, because every year at New Year's in Babylon they marched with the statue of Marduk down in a procession. And in the book, he's like an actual spirit, lives inside the statue. So he does they put a person inside of it, his spirit. It's a whole, you know, witchcraft type of thing. But so that's the thing, is the statue is actually the god. So that one, he was too important. Marduk was way too important to even smash him. So they brought him back to Babylon.
It's still a mystery to me how Assyrian religion works, but we will get into that in the 7th century BC, because our sources will grow infinitely better for life in Assyria, for daily life. But the Assyrian religion is still kind of a mystery. We have this amazing tree that is depicted in a lot of places. We don't really know what it's about. And we also have Ashur, the main god of Babylon, who is all gods, and this weird brand of monotheism that's sort of, your god is he is Ashur too. But then we have the Babylonian religion that is obviously a very strong influence on the Assyrians, and has been all of the time. And I think this is why why Marduk survives this slaughter of the gods.
Very interesting. I look forward to doing some more research and hearing what you find out about what you have to say about that for sure.
Yeah, we'll also see how actually ordinary people lived in Babylon, because we have all these letters sent through the Assyrian postal service, and they talk about daily life. We had some of them in the 8th century. We know of Sargon's daughter's letter, for example, but the amount of clay tablets found from the 7th century BC is super huge. They're still not all translated. They're actually right now looking for more people to learn cuneiform so that they can actually be translated.
That's amazing. I mean, people, you have to realize how hard it was to even then, to read and write. It's not like today where a child learns how to read and write. It wasn't really an alphabet, right? It was just these little marks on
we are getting closer.
On a clay tablet.
We're getting closer to the first Assyrian king who can actually read and write cuneiform, but none of them so far has been able to read and write. And imagine leading this empire without being able to read and write.
I know, your scribes could write anything they want, and you could say, hey, tell them we're going to, tell them this or that, and the scribe could change it if he wanted to, I guess. I mean, he'd probably get flayed alive if he got caught. I wouldn't suggest changing something on Sennacherib or any of the Assyrian kings.
Yeah, the rest of the statues of the gods were destroyed, and the temples were defiled. And later Sennacherib would spin this and say that his troops did it on their own, and it wasn't actually his fault.
Yeah, he said it was his troops, but it's funny because in his inscription itself it says, "I ordered my troops to destroy the." But nobody could read and write, so it didn't matter. Nobody actually read that.
No, it's only we that can see the inconsistencies.
Exactly.
And if a scribe tried to point it out, I think he would be in grave danger.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, pretty much anything in the ancient world, if you did wrong, you were put to death. Just sounds like, an average thing. Oh, if they do that, put them to death. Put them to the sword, or, I guess being put to death was better than being put to death through torture.
Yep. After Sennacherib's death, his son Esarhaddon, or maybe his PR people, would come up with the story that it was not only men who were fighting the gods too, and that basically Asher himself put a whooping on Marduk and his friends.
That's so interesting. I know the sources say that, to make the story, to say that because people were mad that he destroyed Babylon, they spun a whole story that it was the gods and man were fighting. So the Assyrian gods were the victorious ones, and so that's how it ended up. So that's why it happened. But as we'll see that, they sort of, I guess they make friends and try to repair the damage done.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of problems following this sack.
Yeah, totally. And then obviously, the sources say that because of that, it ends up being the complete undoing of Sennacherib because he gets killed.
Yeah, he stays with us for almost this whole decade, but in 681, something happens.
Yep, so he's in his temple praying, and his two sons, most sources say his older sons killed him. Either they killed him with the sword, some sources say he was crushed by a giant statue.
I love that version.
Right? I mean, it's so fitting for Sennacherib. He's so frustrated. He draws all these things, and in the end, he just gets crushed by a giant statue.
And I think that version has some sons of him pushing the statue of the winged bull over him.
I mean, that'd be a way to do it. Hey, Dad, look over there, and push them.
Yeah, but this is a good murder plan because it was just a freak accident.
Yeah, it's just a 50-ton statue just happened to fall.
So sorry, Dad was crushed below a statue. It's really strange.
I mean, they could just blame it on. I guess they would say the gods, did it because of his destruction of Babylon. So the statue just sort of stomped him.
And while this happens, he's worshiping in the temple of Nisroch.
Yeah,
who's that?
I don't know. I was hoping you would know that.
I am not Googling right now. According to the Hebrew Bible, Nisroch was an Assyrian god. So this is it from Kings, 2 Kings 1937? and Isaiah 37:38, where then his sons Adramelech and Sharezer murders Sennacherib in the temple of Nisroch. And Wikipedia thinks that Nisroch is actually Nimrod, which is then another problem.
Nimrod was the hunter, wasn't he? I believe.
I am not Googling Nimrod.
I feel like he had the arrow. He was a hunter god. There's all kinds of gods back in the day.
There is a person in the Bible called Nimrod.
Oh, that's true too.
So I think the Old Testament is not a good source for Babylonian religion. And if this is a god, and it's not Ashur, it's a Babylonian god, which is then quite strange in itself. Why is Sennacherib worshipping in the temple of this Babylonian god? So maybe it's just the temple of Ashur.
Oh, but if he were a Babylonian god, that is very interesting. And then he goes in there maybe to say, hey, I'm sorry about what I did to Babylon, and then the god just crushes him.
Maybe that's what happened. That's a new theory.
That's it. It had nothing to do with his kids. They were framed on the whole thing. There's like, we didn't do it. The god just got all mad and smashed them.
Why I think it was the sons and not the god is Sennacherib's choice of successor.
Yes, I'm surely.
Which is quite interesting.
Yes, like during so after he lost the original crown prince to the Babylonians and when they had captured him, apparently he named Esarhaddon, his son Esarhaddon, as the heir, but he had older sons, the ones that we think killed him, so they didn't like that idea. And as is common in military dictatorships like that, a lot of times there's struggle for power. A lot of times they assassinate the ruler, being their father. And
yes.
So that's what seems to happen. But Esarhaddon, being that at the time when he was named the heir, Sennacherib apparently went to all the people and said, "This is my heir," so that when this happened, he was already the chosen ruler. So it was pretty easy for the people to support him. So I guess what they say happened also was that Esarhaddon was, I should say, the brothers started talking smack about the Esarhaddon, saying he was not respecting his father, that he was up to no good. So he skipped out of town while Sennacherib was still alive. But then after he was killed, he came back into town, and on the way in to take to fight his brothers, the rebels switched over to Esarhaddon's side. So it wasn't a very difficult fight. It wasn't a long, drawn-out civil war. It only took about 40 days, and then Esarhaddon became the new king of Assyria.
Good preparation for the succession by Sennacherib.
Yeah, definitely good idea. Not like some of those kings who split it up between the three brothers, and then that's inevitably civil war ensues after that.
Yeah, that was never the Assyrian way. I also think that Adramelech and Sharezer, the murder brothers, that you could wonder why they were two. So they must have been like full brothers. They must have had the same mother. And I also see the influence of Esarhaddon's mother on Sennacherib, that the selection of Esarhaddon is very much influenced by Esarhaddon's mother, who was then probably a much more favorite wife of Sennacherib.
Yep, and that happens a lot in these stories too, doesn't it? Where the harem, there's battles inside the court, and the harem in the court, and the different mothers of the sons, and
yeah. And we will learn a lot more about Esarhaddon. I think this was a very good choice on Sennacherib's part.
Oh, I definitely agree with that. It's like, did you watch Game of Thrones?
Of course I do. I even podcasted 3 seasons of Game of Thrones in Game of Thrones chat, which you can find on any podcast app. And I'm not too proud of that podcast.
Oh.
But it was, and I will never podcast about TV again, I think, because it was extremely stressful. You had to sort of get it out as quickly as possible, and then it had 1 week lifetime, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, this is like podcasting Game of Thrones when you get into it, because you can't even write. I mean, the Game of Thrones almost has nothing on these stories.
Of course.
I mean, if you think about the intrigue behind the story of the mother, Ezra Hayden's mother, and these guys, and crushing them with the bull, I mean, you could just imagine they could have spent a half a season planning to throw the statue over on top of them.
And it's amazing also these stories survive, because we have seen, of course, they survive because Esarhaddon wins. But we have seen suspicious death for Assyrian rulers that are just sort of wishy-washed over or washed out of the history because the successor is the rebel, like probably Sargon and Tiglath-Pileser.
And there's no internet to get the conspiracy theories out. And there's this, you had to be able to write that on a clay tablet, and that's pretty much what's left, right?
Yeah. Should we summarize the life of Sennacherib then, who has been with us for quite some time?
I think so, yeah. To me, he was for all the trouble he had, he was really a good and able ruler. He wasn't, he knew how to rule. He knew how to be a king. He was a good military leader. I mean, he had some setbacks, but for the most part, he was, he wasn't really out getting defeated in battle. As you said, he loved to build. He spent a lot of time building, and he even knew how to build. He was an engineer. He must have studied engineering.
Yeah, he was quite the scholar compared to other kings.
I mean, he's kind of a Renaissance man, really. I mean, Machiavellian, but Renaissance. I mean, building. He wrote poetry to his wife, the one he liked the most.
Yeah, I wonder which wife that was. Maybe it was Nakia, the mother of Esarhaddon.
Maybe it was. She was very fine, I heard. Very fine.
She is described as Sennacherib's second wife.
I bet the first time you met her, it was like a dream date, you think?
Yeah.
Probably was.
Oh, we don't know that the poetry was for her.
We don't.
Maybe it was for wife number 48.
Could have been. Oh, those guys had the life, I guess. But, I mean, he was so frustrated because he couldn't spend his time in his harem, couldn't spend time building. He always had to go to war. They stole his son. This Merodach-Baladan character was constantly dogging him whatever he did. He must have been like, oh, Merodach-Baladan again?
Yeah, as he had done with Sargon. So he remained the nemesis for the new Assyrian king when Sennacherib took over.
Yep, and then, that was the other thing. His father died. That always bothered him. I guess he was always Assyrian kings weren't supposed to die in office, or in battle either, I should say. So
no other king ever did.
Right, so that bothered him his whole life. And then at the very end, he gets crushed by a statue.
or stabbed by his sons.
Either way, not too good. I hope to have a better end to myself.
Actually, being crushed by an ancient Assyrian statue, I'm kind of interested in that as a way to go. When I'm like 102, I will be hanging out below Assyrian statues and see if they fall down.
Yeah, at 102, that'll be fine.
Maybe there are some big things in the British Museum.
We could plan that, like an assisted suicide or something, and just push the statue over on top of you.
History podcaster crushed by ancient statue. Fan of History will finally have the amount of listeners I wanted.
Well, that'll be something. That'll be good. That should be on YouTube, actually.
I will be filming from the British Museum and put up some videos later this year.
Oh, really? I'll keep an eye out for that.
I did it last year, but I will return there. And sadly, I missed the Ashurbanipal exhibition. It just ended. Oh,
so it was in the British Museum. From where is it normally?
I think the British Museum has a lot of stuff in their storage chambers. So they brought out everything about Ashurbanipal and had this exhibition for like 9 months. It started right after I left London, and it ended before I could get back. So I missed it.
Yeah, that's amazing to see that stuff. It really is. You really connected to history. You see something, it's 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years old, and another human being just like you or me, just making these figurines or artwork or gigantic gates. We're still people.
I'm so impressed by the British Museum. You should really go there if you ever get to London. That goes for all the listeners as well. One thing that surprised me during my 2018 visit was that they had removed all the massacre reliefs of Ashurnasirpal II. They were just not there. I made a video about it on YouTube.
Not politically correct, I guess.
I think they were. They were definitely not politically correct. They're so little this is what we did to all those bastards.
I know. Such a different world. Like I just said, we're still humans, and we had the same brains, and we're same desires and wishes, but just the I don't know, the disrespect for life was just such a different thing, where people just kill people in horrible ways.
Okay, let's talk about Esarhaddon then, because he becomes the Assyrian king during this decade.
Yeah, and so he becomes the king in around 681, and it starts up for him again. So it was Merodach Baladan's son decided, all right, let's carry on my father's tradition, and here's the new king of Assyria. Let's bother him for a long time. So never ends.
Oh my God, it never ends.
So, but it didn't go. It's this one a little bit differently. So after the murder of his father and the uprising again from the Babylonians, Esarhaddon ordered his generals that were stationed in Babylonia to march against the rebels, and the Chaldean prince, he fled to the old refuge of his father. So the reign opened up with great promise, and then it started off again with fighting the Babylonians. So, however, when the son of Baladan, fled, he was actually treacherously killed by the locals.
Oh, you wonder why? Do we know why?
Probably I would say the flattening of Babylon had something to do with it, in my opinion.
Yeah, probably.
I think they said, let's stop messing with the Assyrians, please.
Yeah, please, let's just submit.
Right, so what happens is they try to, basically there's another rebellion, and Esarhaddon puts it down pretty quickly. The one brother is killed when he tries to find refuge. The other brother comes back, begs for mercy, and becomes the king of Babylon.
Oh.
And he makes him the king of Babylon. And then Esarhaddon goes back to the old style of, being more involved in Babylon, where his father was not, sort of a hands-off king. And then Esarhaddon starts to rebuild Babylon. But this is just, sort of the end of our decade here, and the rebuilding really happens into the next decade. So that would probably carry on to the next podcast.
We'll talk about that when we get to the 670s. But I'm so amazed that Esarhaddon himself thinks that his father's decision to sack Babylon was wrong.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, maybe they had a bunch of years to think about it, too. If he did it, he did it in the beginning of the decade. By the end of the decade, his father's killed over. They probably took a lot of grief for 7 or 8 years. And then just put the rebellion down quick. And then maybe he said, all right, we're just going to make peace with this. We're going to go back to the old way. We're going to pay attention to Babylon, and we're going to rebuild it. And, I guess it worked for him anyway. I don't want to have any spoilers for what happens later.
Yeah, it's amazing that he makes this decision, Esarhaddon. But I think this would also put him in a very positive light in Babylonia, in the country. That he brought back the gods that were captured. This must have been Marduk, and also gods that were captured earlier, because the Assyrians had been capturing gods from Babylon before.
Right.
And then he showed his sort of positive intent to Babylonia. And maybe he thought this was the way to go, and that we could finally have peace and quiet from Babylon. But of course, that's not going to work.
Not forever.
And to really spoil things, this will, of course, end with the destruction of Assyria itself in 612, mainly by the Babylonians.
They waited a long time, those Babylonians, to finally get back at the Assyrians, didn't they? I shouldn't say they waited, but it took them a long time.
Yes. Yeah, that was because they didn't know how to fight like the Assyrians do. This enormous violence capacity that the Assyrians have always colored this relationship, that in the end it's extremely hard. We don't see any Babylonian armies go to Nineveh or to the earlier capitals before 612.
Right.
But when they do, they will do it more thoroughly than Sennacherib did, because I think this restoration became much easier because Sennacherib was actually lying in his inscription. He hadn't leveled the city to sand.
Right. I mean, where would you start to rebuild if you turned it into a meadow? It'd be a whole new city, pretty much. You wouldn't even know where to start.
And of course, the reasonable decision, had Sennacherib destroyed the city this thoroughly, would have been to make another city the capital.
Right.
Because you have some great cities nearby, so you could just make them the capital instead.
Yep. Well, and then I guess that in the end, that's the lesson for for Assyria. When you're really, really nasty, eventually you get to make a lot of enemies.
Okay, if you're really looking ahead, I think this very clearly illustrates, as did Ashurnasirpal II's policies, why the Assyrian Empire eventually fails, and why the Persians are so successful when they are pretty much the Assyrian Empire 2.0, where they make a tiny, tiny change in foreign policy, and that is, okay, maybe we shouldn't massacre people, maybe we shouldn't level their cities, maybe we shouldn't extort everybody like the Assyrians did. Maybe we should just make people want to be a part of our empire. And that is the great breakthrough of Cyrus the Great, which I hope we can podcast about in a year or two.
I hope so as well. So
because people remember the Persian Empire much more than they remember the Assyrian Empire. And that is one of the big reasons for that, is this change of policy for running an empire. Because the Assyrians have been so violent and cruel for 300 years.
I mean, they make the Nazis look like, wimps.
Well, they didn't put up... they were nicer to the Jews. They just took them away and made them Assyrians. They didn't have concentration camps.
True that.
And they had... well, I talked about it before, but once again in these times, immigration is an infected issue here in Sweden, and I just love the Assyrian forced immigration. Like,
right.
You have to become Assyrians, but we don't want to. No, now you're part of our empire.
Right, I know, right?
And then send them to some border where they are identified as Assyrians. Now these people who are violent against us thinks you're Assyrians. And you are Assyrians. And if you think you're Assyrians, then we'll send reinforcements. I mean,
it was obviously a whole different type of world. It's hard for people today to understand how that was. It was because there wasn't so many people. I mean, you needed people to be there. And instead of just massacring everybody, I guess you brought a whole new population around and took you out of your... If you took you out of your home, you couldn't fight back too much anymore. Plus, we needed you there, so it was a win-win. Now we build walls.
And even when the Assyrians massacre people, it's in the thousands, not in the hundreds of thousands or millions, like in World War II.
Oh, I'm not trying to. I was definitely not trying to minimize the Nazis. They're horrible.
I eventually will talk about them.
Yeah.
I'm still interested in doing my series on the murder attempts on Hitler. There is a first episode on YouTube.
Oh yes.
Yeah, I did a first episode.
You did?
A first episode on the, I think it was 42 attempts to murder Hitler.
Really? Oh, yes. I didn't realize there was that many. Wow.
And he sort of became convinced that he was immortal. Because he survived so many assassinations. So there are some really good assassination attempts that should have succeeded. But Hitler was a very, very lucky guy.
You know what would have worked?
No?
Crushing with the giant statue.
That's right. Why didn't I think of that?
If you ever get a time machine, that'll be the way to do it.
Okay, this is now becoming a huge tangent. We should return to the 680s.
Okay.
I think we're done with the Assyrians, right?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, we can move on to another part of the world.
Where do you want to go?
Well, you'll just have to wait and see on the next episode of Fan of History. But hint, they have the Olympics there.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Patreon.com/fanofhistory. Just $1 an episode would help us out. Thanks, and see you next time.